Sorry for that long recitation of my history. I am old. I have worked in many places, but I'm not as old as my mother was when she would go out and speak to people, and she liked to talk to elementary school children. And so one of the children raised her hand and said, "Mrs. Drew, is Mrs. Lincoln still alive too?" So I'm not quite that old, but I'm really happy today to have a chance to tell you about my father's journey, because it happened a long time ago, but I think it's very instructive for all of us, and particularly important for all of you, because you are carrying on his legacy. And in order to do that with enthusiasm, I think you have to know a little bit about him. So I hope you'll take away a few of the stories that I'm going to tell you about his life. I think it's important, you know that he set up the first Red Cross blood bank for plasma transfusion during World War II. That is his claim to fame. He did not discover plasma. He did not set up the first blood bank. He was not the person who first researched how to preserve plasma in a sterile condition. So what is it that he did? What it was that he did was he rose to a crisis at a time when there wasn't anybody else who was quite prepared for the crisis. He had gone to medical school in Canada at McGill, and he had an internship there. One night he was the only intern on duty, and there was a fire. There were many patients who were badly burned. When you're badly burned, you go into shock. He decided to give the patients plasma because plasma stabilizes people who are in shock, and it can be given to anyone regardless of blood type. So he became the man of the hour in that crisis in Montreal at the hospital, and he kind of laid the foundation for what was going to happen later. He left Montreal and applied for residency programs in the United States. He had done very well at McGill University, finished second in his class. A woman came out number one, I just want you to know. And so he thought he would, pursue the next step with vigor in a residency program. But in the United States, blacks were not accepted in residency programs in the time that he graduated in the 30s. He applied to the Mayo Clinic, thinking, well, surely the Mayo Clinic, in all of its scientific greatness, is not going to be hampered by that. They rejected him. So he went home to Washington, D.C., where he had been born, and he went to the hospital that was set up in Washington for slaves returning from the Civil War. It's called Freedmen's Hospital. And there he began his work in pathology. There were no, in the medical school at Howard University, which was attached to the Freedmen's Hospital, there were no black faculty members. The first black dean of the medical school said, we need to send our faculty out for fellowship so that they can get training so they can compete with anyone, and we can begin to have heads of departments who are African American. So he received a fellowship to go to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York. He went there, and he had two very, very important mentors. One was Alan Whipple, who was head of the Department of Surgery at Columbia, and the other was John Scudder, who was very interested in shock. So here comes a young physician who's already had this experience with shock in Montreal, was very interested in blood typing. He really studied it a lot when he was in medical school. And together they decided that they would set up a blood bank there in the hospital for their work in shock, to see how to best serve patients who were in shock. So that gave them experience in banking blood right there in the hospital. Then comes a letter, a telegram from England. England's now in the war. We're not in the war yet, World War II. We've heard of Dr. Drew's work at McGill and at Columbia. We would like him to send us 5,000 ampules of plasma. Our soldiers are being shot, they're wounded, they're dying, we need help, send us plasma. My father answered, there are not 5,000 ampules of plasma anywhere to be had in this country, but we will collect blood, we will spin it down, we will send you plasma. So he invented the first refrigerated blood donation truck. And those trucks went out and they collected blood, they brought it back in, they spun it down, they dried it, and they sent it over to England. That was very successful. Everything arrived in sterile condition. They were able to add water, give it to the soldiers. It saved lives. They kept doing it. But the United States Navy said, we're not going to collect any blood from blacks, just from whites. My father protested that. He knew that the only difference in blood was whether you're A, B, or O, not whether you're black or white or Asian or any other group. Eventually they decided, okay, we will collect blood from anyone, but we're going to label it. We're going to label it by race. He said there's no justification to label it by race. It only needs to be labeled by type. But they insisted. Now, here's where it was a disappointment with one of his mentors, because his mentor, who he'd worked with in setting up the blood bank in the hospital, and who continued to work with him, when the Red Cross asked him to set up a blood bank for plasma transfusion for them, the first such blood bank, Dr. Scudder said, I think we ought to continue to label. And he said, well, I disagree with you. But the important thing was to keep collecting, keep sending, and by now we needed it for our soldiers. Okay, so he moved ahead, and that was his pattern. Obstacles came up, but he just kept moving toward the goal. The goal was to help people and save lives. So the Red Cross did yeoman work, collected blood, saved lives, sent plasma, and my father's work led to his asking for permission from the head of the other mentor that he had at Columbia, the head of the Department of Surgery, Dr. Whipple. I would like to sit for the examination to become board certified as a surgeon. There were at that time no board certified black surgeons. Dr. Whipple said, yes, your work has been outstanding. I think you can sit for it. I think you'll be successful. So he did that, and he passed the examination. Not only did he pass it, but when he began to do his oral examination, it was such an important piece of research into the whole history of blood research, not only here, but in Russia. Russia had done a lot of the foundational research on blood transfusion. They had worked on cadavers, however, not live people. anyway, the people came from all over the medical school to listen. So he really made an impact. They thought it was amazing that a black physician was in that position of having made that advance in what we knew and how we were implementing transfer of healthy plasma to anyone in need. He left the Red Cross to go back to Friedman's Hospital. He said, we don't have any other board-certified black surgeons, and I want to grow that group. And I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to doing that. Well, he didn't know that in 10 years' time, that was 1940, he would die in a car accident. But in that 10 years' time, he trained over half of the black board-certified surgeons in the United States. And that was not only because he was a passionate student about it, but because Dr. Whipple had enlarged the training for surgeons from what used to be 1 year to 3 years. And it became the leading surgical training center in the nation. So my father was fortunate enough to have gone to Columbia, where he got 3 years of training, and he brought that back to this very, very small, underfunded, mostly black hospital in Washington, D.C. So his first class had to take their examination at Johns Hopkins. They had to take their examination with other students seeking to be board certified from all over the country. And he was so worried about them. They were all like his children. We had to compete. The family had to compete with the residents. And he was in the basement with a sledgehammer banging out an old coal bin. And the phone rang, and it was the president of Howard University, and he spoke to my mother, and he said, I'm calling to let Charlie know that one of his boys came in second in the examination for board certification. So she hollered that down in the basement, and the president said, that's not what all I called for. I called to say one of his boys came in first. So that is, again, very, very incredible at this time in our history. And he just knew that the medical students of any stripe were capable, with the right training, of rising to the top of the field, because they wanted to do it, they needed to do it, their skills were needed. And the people he trained went out and headed departments of surgery all over the South. So there are two things to remember, I think, about his contribution. One is that he did very serious research and writing about blood plasma transfusion, and making it safe, making it accessible, sharing it with the world in the time of crisis. And the second is that he grew more physicians of the very top quality to take care of people in underserved areas. Now that's what he did, that's what he contributed, but the branch of that tree is now the Charles Drew University. And we have trained, he had 4 children, we have trained 7,000 physicians, nurses, PAs, and health workers in Charles Drew University since 1966. 7,000. He didn't found the university, it was named for him because of the work that he had done in training physicians and in scientific research. So the university is trying to carry on that legacy, not only in training people who want to serve in underserved areas, but doing research on disparities in health in minority communities. Charles Drew University was born after the 1965 riots in Watts. The student body was identified by the Chronicle of Higher Education last year and the year before as the second most diverse four-year undergraduate college in the country. We are 30% African American, 30% Latino, 20% Asian Pacific Islander. We're a world university. We serve all students, all ethnicities, all races, but the mission of the school is what sets it apart, because it's people who want to serve the people in need in underserved communities. That's what makes it different. And so the legacy goes on through the university in his name. One other thing I want to tell you, at the university, the school bears his name, and the family, of course, is very proud, but the main building is named for someone named Montague Cobb. Montague Cobb went to high school with my father. He went to Amherst College with my father. They went to medical school at the same time, and they taught at Howard University Medical School at the same time. So they were best friends. But Dr. Cobb took a different path. My father took research and training. Dr. Cobb took civil rights advocacy in the health arena. And I will send Kimberly the link to a wonderful documentary which has just been done on Dr. King and how he attacked, with the support of President Lyndon Johnson, segregation in hospitals throughout the South in order to implement the Medicare Act in Congress in 1965. And it's a dramatic story. It hasn't been told. You haven't seen pictures of how it looked when you had a segregated ward in a hospital. And I really recommend that you look at it. You can just watch it on your computers, and you will see that the civil rights arena was not limited to, can we all get on the same bus? Can we all go to the same school? Can we eat at the same restaurant? It had to do with health. It had to do with whether or not black physicians were given privileges at hospitals. If you didn't have a physician who had privileges at the hospital that you wanted to go to, you couldn't go to that hospital. The AMA did not permit black physicians to be members. They admitted my father only after he had died. So we had a very segregated system in healthcare.
So Ms. Drew Ivie, before you leave, on behalf of the American Red Cross Los Angeles region, first we want to thank you for sharing some really important background and history that is, it's African American history, it's Red Cross history, and it's American history, and we appreciate you educating us a little bit and sharing your family's connection to the life-saving work that we in the Red Cross do. So thank you for that. And as a small token of our appreciation, we have this kind of a Red Cross goodie bag with all kinds of neat things in there for you.
Very heavy.
So thank you again.